to Tennessee's at-home learning series for literacy. Today's lesson is for all our 6th graders out there, though children of all ages are welcome to tune in. This is the 5th lesson in our lesson series. My name is Megan Gilley, and I am a 6th grade teacher in Tennessee schools. I am excited to be your teacher for this lesson today. Welcome to my virtual classroom. Today, we will be learning all about the Middle Ages again, specifically the daily life of a serf. Today you will need 2 pieces of paper, a pen or pencil, and a firm surface to write on, as there will be quite a bit of writing today. If you've missed a previous lesson, you can visit the Tennessee Department of Education at www.tn.gov/education. However, you can still fully participate in today's lesson. Our focus for today is on literacy. So even though we are going to be reading a lot about serfs during the Middle Ages, it's important that we develop ourselves as readers and writers. So today as we read, we are going to continue to cite evidence in the text to help support our thinking. In addition, we are going to be analyzing how the topic of serfs is developed throughout the text. And lastly, we're going to compile all of our key information from today, the most important details, into a writing piece. Specifically, we will write an informative paragraph that explains how the serfs lived. So it's important that you follow along with me today. Over the past few lessons, we have learned about the Middle Ages and how the Roman Empire changed into Europe under the feudal government, which was created by whom? If you were with us, do you remember? You're right, Charles the Great. We have also studied a lot about lords, serfs, and knights. In addition, we have learned about how towns evolved and started to bring a middle class between the serfs and the lords. If you look over on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the feudal pyramid of power. And where it says king is where we learned about the lords. And where it says peasants is where we've learned about serfs. And above those, just in our previous lesson, we learned about knights. But again, we're going to investigate today the serfs and their lives even further. And you can see the feudal pyramid of power just a little bit better there and where the serfs land. So today, as I read this first excerpt, I want you to think about just the lives and how the serfs lived. Imagine being yourself during this time period as a serf. So most people in medieval Europe were not lords, ladies, or knights. They were peasants or common people. Most of the peasants, though, chose to work freely and not serve a lord. Serfs were very much a part of a manor estate. In fact, if a manor estate was taken over by a new lord, the serfs had to remain there to serve the new lord. If you're thinking that being a serf sounds something like an enslaved person, you are right. So I want us to find evidence because that's what really strong readers do to help support the questions that we have about the text. So our first question that I want us to take a look at is, did you realize that most people were serfs when we read about them a few days ago? I'm not sure that I really understood that. And I'm thinking, well, where might I be able to find that in the text? It specifically says in the first 2 sentences here that most people in medieval Europe were not lords, ladies, or knights. Instead, they were peasants or common people. Again, when we think of the hierarchy of power in the feudal system, they were ranked at the very bottom. I want us to think about just in general, and we're not going to find this in the text, but do you remember what we called serfs who worked freely? Hence the word free and freely. You're right, it's freemen. And we're going to talk about those people today as well. Lastly, did you realize that serfs were like being a slave? It says right here in the text at the very bottom that if you're thinking a serf sounds something like being enslaved, an enslaved person, you're right. I agree, I didn't think about that either, but it starts to seem that way. So we're going to continue on. Sadly, the practice of slavery had existed for thousands of years in different parts of the world. However, the idea of serfdom happened slowly over time as the culture and development of medieval Europe took shape. There was always a need for large numbers of workers. However, as more and more people became Christian, the church became opposed to enslaving Christians. As a result, many people who had been enslaved were freed. These men were known as freedmen. Unfortunately, freedmen were not always able to make much use of their freedom. Since they had been enslaved all their lives, they were generally poor. So their lives after being freed were affected by that. So according to the text that I just read, why did serfs become freedmen? I want you to think about that. Can you find evidence in the text? Why did serfs become freedmen? I have my highlighter and I'm looking. Strong readers always using a highlighter or a pencil in their hand to underline our evidence. Are you right? It says that, however, right here in the middle, more and more people became Christian, and the church became opposed to enslaving Christians. As a result, many people that had been enslaved were freed. So again, the church opposed enslaving people who declared themselves as Christians. I want us to think about the next question. Why wasn't Freeman able to truly be free? What did we say toward the end of this section? Can you find it? Where in the text does it say why they couldn't truly be free? Well, it tells us in the last two sentences they were not able to make much use of their freedom because they had been enslaved all their lives, that they were generally poor. So I want us to continue on reading. Even if they could buy land, they probably would not have been able to protect themselves against warring tribes and powerful lords. Therefore, around the 900s, many freedmen began to trade freedom for security by placing themselves under the protection of a feudal lord. Think about that. This is how many freedmen became serfs. It's important to note that medieval serfs had some rights that many enslaved people did not. They could not be sold apart from the land, and they had the right to keep what was left over after paying whatever they owed to their lord. In addition, serfs could pass property on to their children. So there are certain rights during the lives that they had lived. Continuing on, there weren't many luxuries for serfs in the Middle Ages. Generally, they led a hard life. Lords were supposed to protect their serfs, but if a lord treated a serf unfairly, there was little a serf could do about it. Serfs had to work extremely hard, and they kept only a small amount of what they grew or made. By around year 1000, wood was hard to come by in parts of Europe, meaning it was really hard to get. The house of a serf typically had a simple wood frame with a mixture of mud and straw spread between the wooden beams as walls. So I'm thinking that them not being able to have access to as much wood impacted how their houses were built. We'll continue. The roof of the house was made of straw and the floor was dirt. In wet weather, the floor turned to mud. Serfs slept on the floor, perhaps with a layer of straw to provide a little bit of cushioning and warmth. They lived with their animals, chickens, sheep, and pigs. There was no fireplace, just a hearth in the middle of the floor with smoke drifting up through a hole in the roof. We get a lot of details here about what a serf's house looked like. Can you find in the text where it describes what a serf's house looked like? And I'm thinking, and I have my highlighter in my hand ready to go. All right, boys and girls, Follow along with me. Yes, they had straw and mud between the wooden beams as their walls. In addition, it also tells us that they had dirt on the floor and that the floor during rain turned to mud. I wonder where the serfs slept. Can you find that in the text too? You're right. It tells us right here that serfs slept on the floor, and we also know that they lived with their animals. So the animals were also in the house with them, not just outside. Did serfs use heat in their houses? Did they have a fire? Well, you'll see that it says there was no fireplace. You're right if you pointed out that detail, but it did have just a small hearth in the middle of the floor. It was just enough to be able to cook food on, and the smoke from that was able to go through a really small hole in the roof. Let's continue reading about lives of serfs. It's very interesting. So serfs built the few pieces of furniture they possessed, sewed their own clothes, and grew or raised their own food. In fact, serfs made most of everything they needed. Continue following along. Serfs lived close to the land, and they spent most of their days working for the Lord on the manor, plowing his fields, planting his seeds, harvesting his crops, and stomping grapes to make his wine. Women were often in charge of small livestock. They would shear the master's sheep, spin the wool into yarn, and weave it into a cloth. Women also had the job of tending the family vegetable garden and caring for the children. I want us to think about the section that we read. Why does the author say that serfs lived close to the land? I'm thinking about that. Serfs lived close to the land. You're right. It says here in the text that they would shear the master's sheep, spin the wool into yarn, and weave it into cloth. They used that to be able to sew their own clothes. And everything that they used, they grew or raised all their own food. So they were really close to the land in that way. What jobs were there for women? We can see here in the middle of the second paragraph that women were in charge of small livestock. What are livestock again? Livestock. Oh yeah, you're right. They're farm animals. That's correct. Let's continue reading on. While the serfs prepared food and goods for the master, they had very little themselves. Serfs lived on a very simple diet that included bread and vegetables. Interestingly, historians have noted that women's diets seem to improve, meaning get better, after about the year 1000. This helped them live longer and have more children, contributing to the population boom of the high Middle Ages. What happens if serfs got sick? Well, they depended on village healers who used local herbs to treat illnesses. Lords might have a professional physician, though his cures were probably not any more advanced. Of course, not all lords were cruel and heartless. Many realized that if their serfs were going to work hard, they had to be reasonably healthy. So I want us to be thinking about, what is it that the serfs ate? Can you find it in the text to support this answer? That's right. They had bread and vegetables right here. It was a very simple diet that included breads and vegetables. Who had better diets, women or men? And if I remember correctly, they improved after year 1000. Here it says in the text, you're right. Historians have noted that women's diets seem to improve after about the year 1000, which meant that they had better diets. What happened when a lord was sick? Where in the text could we find that? What happened when a lord was sick? When a lord was sick, they might have had a professional physician, a doctor, though his cures were probably not any more advanced. But what happened when a serf was ill? What happened when a serf was ill? Where can you see it? You're right. They depended on village healers who used local herbs to treat illnesses. Let's continue on. I want us to think about how serfs celebrated holidays. Be thinking about, how might you celebrate holidays? And let's see how it compares with the serfs. While all peasants, serfs, or freedmen faced many difficulties, there were still some good times in their hard lives. Just as we enjoy holidays today, people also enjoyed them in the Middle Ages. In fact, the word holiday comes from the holy days that were part of the calendar in the Middle Ages. Remember, the church was a part of everyday life in the manor estate. People celebrated more holy days than we do today. With Sundays, saints' days, and other holidays, there were about 100 days each year when people did little work. On the holy days, the whole manor attended church. But there was usually more to these holy days than worship. The nightly tournaments you read about earlier often took place on holidays. Remember, like the jousting? That's what this is referring to. People held parties with music and dancing. They took part in sports such as bowling and wrestling. They watched jugglers and magicians and listened to traveling troubadours and minstrels. These holidays gave people something to look forward to and lightened the load of serfdom. Serfdom is referring to the life as a serf. What were some of the ways that the serfs celebrated holidays? And I know that's a big chunk of text right here, but a really strong reader can, again, use their highlighter or their pencil to help underline text evidence. What are some of the ways serfs celebrated holidays? That's right. They went to nightly tournaments that took place on holidays. They also went to parties with music and dancing. They bowled and they wrestled, as it says here in the text. Great job. Can you help me figure out what was a troubadour? Sometimes the text doesn't always come out to explicitly say or tell us exactly what the word means, so we have to be able to think about our context clues, meaning what is it saying around this word? And I'm going to point us to this sentence that it's used in. They watched jugglers and magicians and listened to traveling troubadours and minstrels. And I'm thinking, well, if it uses the word listened to traveling troubadours, I'm thinking that a troubadour is probably a musician. So great job if you were thinking the same thing. So we have read a lot about the lives of serfs today, and in this next part, it's called guided practice. And during this time, I want you to pull out a sheet of paper and follow along with me. Today's task is to think about everything that we have read about, and we are going to take all the key facts that we've learned and put them into a graphic organizer. So we are going to take these key details, because it's always important to know, well, what are we going to do with them? we're going to be making a paragraph out of this explaining how the serfs lived close to the land. So I'm going to have us create a T-chart. So I want you to take your piece of paper and you're going to fold it in half for me. And we're going to make a T-chart, just like I have up on the screen. You'll draw a line pretty close to the center of your paper and a T at the top. And on the left-hand side, please label your column questions. And on the right, we're going to have our answers. Again, our answers are the key details that's going to help us figure out what is the most important takeaways from everything that we read today. And my questions are going to help guide us to get there. So I want us to think about question 1 and try to follow along with me. If I move a little too fast, remember you can always review the lesson at the Tennessee Department of Education's website. Question 1, I want you to think about what was the difference between serfs and freedmen. Think about that. What was the difference between serfs and freemen? Serfs and freemen, the difference. You're right. Serfs were considered slaves with little rights. However, freemen were free, but they were so poor that they relied on the lords almost as much as the serfs did. They didn't have as much access after being free because they were generally poor from being a serf their entire life. So they would still fall at the bottom of the feudal hierarchy. Let's think about question 2. How did the freemen rely on the lords the most? How did the freemen rely on the lords the most? It's a tough detail to recall back to. How did the freemen rely on the lords the most? They needed something from them. And if you said protection, you're absolutely correct. The freemen relied on the lords for protection. Underneath question 2, you'll draw a line, and we're going to jot down question 3. Question 3, I want us to think about, well, how did the serfs live? We had so many details about how they lived today. And I'm thinking about starting with the homes that they had. We had so many different descriptions. Remember, wood was hard to come by, and so we had a description of what they used between the wood. Do you remember? You're right. They had straw huts with dirt floors, and a lot of them had mud and straw to help insulate them, meaning keep them warm. Animals were kept inside. They slept on the floor. They didn't have a fireplace for heat, but they had a small hearth that was so small it was just used for cooking, and this small hole that let smoke out the top of their house. I want you to draw a line underneath that question, and that's okay if you're still jotting down your thinking. That's great. I want us to think about question 4. What else was it that the serfs did? Meaning, in their free time, what was it that they might have done? And it specifically talked about women, what they did. You're right. They sewed their own clothes. They sheared sheep, not sheet, sheep. They knitted their own clothing, plowed fields, and harvested crops. So they spent a lot of time close to the land, remember, with animals and as well as with food. I want you to draw a line underneath question 4, and we're going to move on to question number 5. And I want us to think about, what is it that the serfs ate? Do you remember? Because if I'm recalling correctly, I remember reading something about how they had a really simple diet. Do you remember? You're right. They mostly ate breads and vegetables. They didn't have any meat, you can see here from the text. And one of the last things that we learned, and I'm not going to jot this on our paper due to time, but one of the things that they did was spend holidays in a certain way. I want you to just be thinking about, how is it that they spent their holidays? They did go to jousting tournaments. You are correct. They also bowled and they wrestled. So those are some of the things, or some of the ways that they spent their time on holidays. So keep that in mind as we move on to the next portion. All right, boys and girls, independent practice time. This is where you are going to spend the next little bit writing. So we have read all of this text. We have cited our evidence to support all of our thinking. We have then compiled on our T-chart from the last page the most important takeaways from today's reading. And it's important that you understand that's a graphic organizer. You can use that to then compile your end product through writing. So today you will write an explanation of how serfs lived. The author states, serfs were close to the land. In our guided practice section, again, we took a great deal of notes on how serfs lived. Please use your notes to explain how serfs lived off land. I want you to use at least 3 details and fully explain how each detail relates to the quote, serfs were close to the land. If you can do that on your own, and I want you to try that, okay? But if you're a little bit stuck, I'm going to put up on the screen a guided practice for you. This is a really great way to organize your writing and fill in these sentence stems. Again, you can go back to the Tennessee Department of Education's website and find this lesson, pause it here, and try to do this on your own. I can't wait to see what you guys write from today's lesson. I have enjoyed learning about the Middle Ages with you. We have studied the change of the Roman Empire into the Middle Ages, serfs and lords and knights and how towns emerged, and the impact of the church on the Middle Ages. Thank you so much for inviting me into your home today. I look forward to seeing you in our next lesson in Tennessee's At Home Learning series. Have a great day.